Jack Turner, a former Army Ranger living deep inside the Pine Hollow forest, was moving quietly through the trees on a routine hunt before sunrise. He expected nothing more than tracks in the snow and silence until his German Shepherd Ranger stopped cold, ears locked forward, then began digging frantically at a patch of freshly disturbed ground. Jack rushed in, pushing aside snow and frozen soil, when he heard it, faint knocking from beneath the earth. Seconds later, he tore open a shallow pit and pulled out a woman buried alive, her wrists bound, her mouth taped, her uniform barely visible under dirt and blood. She was a police officer, still breathing, still fighting. And her first desperate words were not for help, but a warning. "They think I'm dead, and they're coming back." As the forest darkened and distant engines echoed through the trees, Jack realized this wasn't just a rescue. It was the start of a manhunt, because the truth she carried was dangerous enough to bury her alive, and deadly enough to change everything. Subscribe for more powerful veteran and dog rescue stories. Comment below and tell us, where are you watching from today? Snow settled thick across Pine Hollow Forest, muting the world into a white hush where sound traveled strangely and every breath felt heavier than the last. Jack Carter moved slowly between the trees, boots pressing careful prints into the fresh snow. At 43, he carried the solid build of a man who had once relied on his body to survive and now relied on discipline to keep it useful. His brown leather jacket was worn smooth at the elbows, the red and black plaid shirt beneath it buttoned tight against the cold. A short, neatly kept beard framed a square jaw lined by years of restraint rather than anger, and faint lines cut from the corners of his eyes, the kind left by long days squinting into sun and snow instead of laughter. Jack's posture was calm but guarded, shoulders set not in tension, but readiness. Life had taught him that stillness was not peace, it was preparation. Beside him moved Ranger, a 4-year-old German Shepherd with a thick sable coat darkened along the spine and a broad black muzzle dusted white with snow. Ranger's eyes were a deep, intelligent amber, alert without being frantic, and his movements carried the quiet efficiency of a dog trained for work rather than show. Once a military working dog, Ranger had learned early that silence kept you alive longer than noise. He stayed close to Jack's left side, matching pace, tail low but relaxed, every sense tuned outward. Jack trusted Ranger in a way he trusted almost no one else. People lied. Dogs didn't. They weren't hunting out of hunger. Jack had food. He hunted because movement kept his mind from wandering places it didn't need to go. Pine Hollow was where he'd chosen to disappear after the Army ended badly, not with medals, but paperwork that told a cleaner story than the truth. A mission gone wrong, a report rewritten, a command that needed someone to blame. Jack had learned how easily a life could be buried under words long before he ever saw snow piled over a grave. Ranger stopped. Not slowed, stopped. His body stiffened mid-step, ears locked forward, nostrils flaring sharply as if the air itself had changed flavor. Jack felt it too, a subtle pressure, like the forest had inhaled and was holding its breath. He followed Ranger's gaze up the slope and saw something that didn't belong, a thin beam of light slicing through the trees, then another. Flashlights. Human voices drifted through the cold, muffled, but purposeful. Jack frowned. No one hunted here this deep without knowing the land, and no one sane dug in frozen ground unless they had to. Ranger let out a low sound, not a bark, not a growl, but something tighter. Jack crouched, easing forward until the slope revealed more. 3 men stood near a shallow pit, shovels biting into the snow-packed soil with rushed, uneven rhythm. They were dressed in dark winter gear, faces shadowed by beanies and scarves. One man, broad and heavy-set, moved with the lazy confidence of someone used to others doing his thinking. Another, thinner, jittery, kept glancing over his shoulder. The third spoke into a radio clipped to his chest. Jack's eyes narrowed as a woman's shape became visible in the pit below them, motionless at first glance, then unmistakably alive. "Move faster," one man snapped, voice sharp with impatience. "Chon song kota, len tu tren." The words hit Jack harder than the cold. Bury her alive. Order from above. Ranger's body tensed further, muscles coiling as if waiting for permission to explode. Jack felt something old and dangerous shift inside him. Not rage, not fear, but recognition. He had heard that tone before. Men following orders they didn't want to think about. The woman in the pit stirred weakly. Snow clung to her dark hair, which was pulled into a messy knot at the back of her head. Even half-buried, Jack could see she was lean, built for endurance rather than softness. Her shoulders narrow but strong beneath a dirt-streaked police jacket. Her skin was pale against the blood dried along her temple, freckles faint beneath grime, her breath coming shallow and uneven. Duct tape bound her wrists behind her back, biting into bruised skin. Her eyes hazel, fierce even through exhaustion, tracked the men above her with something closer to defiance than fear. This was not a woman who begged. Jack didn't rush. He never rushed. Panic got people killed. His mind worked the way it always had under pressure, cataloging angles, distances, habits. The heavy-set man favored his right leg. The jittery one kept adjusting his gloves, nervous, inattentive. The third man held authority, his voice clipped, efficient. Ranger watched them too, head low, ears twitching, waiting. Jack's thoughts flickered, unbidden, to another pit in another country, sand instead of snow, a voice crackling through a radio telling him to hold position while everything burned. He swallowed hard and forced the memory away. This was here. This was now. And this woman was still breathing. He scooped a chunk of ice from the ground and tossed it down slope, letting it clatter loudly against rock. The sound echoed sharp and wrong. The jittery man spun toward it. "What was that?" he hissed. "Probably an animal," the heavy-set one muttered. "Go check," the leader ordered without looking. As the jittery man stepped away, Jack moved. Ranger surged forward in a blur of muscle and fur, silent until impact. He slammed into the man's legs, sending him sprawling into the snow with a startled shout that cut off abruptly as Ranger pinned him, teeth flashing inches from flesh. Jack was already moving, boots pounding once, twice, then he was at the pit, hands tearing at the packed snow and soil with brutal urgency. The other two men shouted, scrambling, but Ranger's sudden snarl froze them for half a second long enough. Jack grabbed the woman under the arms and hauled. She cried out, a muffled sound forced through tape, pain flashing across her face as her body cleared the pit. She was lighter than he expected, her weight uneven, muscles trembling from cold and shock. Up close, he saw the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she locked her gaze on his face as if memorizing it, as if anchoring herself to the fact that someone real had found her. "Easy," Jack said low, his voice steady despite the chaos. He sliced the tape from her wrists with his hunting knife, fingers surprisingly gentle. "You're not done yet." Her chest heaved as air hit her lungs fully. She shook violently, teeth chattering, but she didn't scream. When she spoke, her voice was rough, scraped raw by dirt and terror. "They think I'm dead," she whispered. "They'll come back." Jack met her eyes and saw the truth settle there like frost. This wasn't random violence. This was erasure. Behind him, Ranger barked once, sharp and commanding, driving the remaining men back just far enough to buy time. Jack pulled the woman close, feeling her heart hammer against his chest, and turned toward the trees. The forest no longer felt quiet. It felt awake. The forest broke into motion the instant Jack pulled Mia Bennett free of the pit. Snow scattered under hurried boots, and voices snapped sharp with panic and rage as the remaining men realized the order had failed. Jack did not look back. He shifted Mia's weight against his chest, feeling how light she was, how her body shook with cold and shock, and turned downhill where the trees grew thick and the ground dipped into shadow. Ranger stayed tight to Jack's flank, moving not as a dog chasing chaos, but as a soldier clearing a path, teeth bared only when needed, eyes flicking between threats and the woman who could barely stand. Mia's first clear breath hit her like fire. She coughed, a raw sound torn from lungs, starved of air, then forced herself upright despite the pain screaming through her wrists and ribs. At 33, Mia had the compact athletic build of someone who lived in motion rather than comfort. Medium height, narrow waist, shoulders trained by years in a duty belt and body armor. Her dark brown hair had come loose from its knot, strands stuck to her blood-smeared cheek, and her skin light olive beneath the grime had gone ashen from exposure. Even like this, broken and half-frozen, there was a steadiness in her gaze that told Jack she was not someone who collapsed when things went wrong. She locked eyes with him and shook her head once, firm. "I can move," she said, voice hoarse but controlled. "Just don't stop." They didn't. Jack guided her through a stand of spruce where the wind piled snow into uneven drifts that swallowed sound. He kept his body angled between Mia and the slope above, where shouts echoed and a flashlight beam cut through branches. Ranger circled once, then darted back upslope, barking sharply, just enough noise to draw attention. Jack felt a tight flicker of gratitude. Ranger had learned early that noise, used right, could save lives. The men regrouped quickly. Jack heard one voice rise above the rest, calm where the others were frantic. "Spread out," it ordered. "She's hurt. She won't get far." The tone made Jack's jaw set. That voice belonged to someone used to being obeyed. He glanced back once and caught a glimpse of the speaker through the trees. A tall man with a close-cropped beard and a dark parka cinched tight, moving with measured steps rather than haste. His posture was relaxed, confident, as if the forest itself belonged to him. Jack filed the image away without a name. Some people didn't need names to be dangerous. They cut east toward a shallow ravine where a frozen creek wound between banks crusted with ice. Jack slid down first, boots scraping rock, then reached up to steady Mia. She grimaced, but didn't cry out. Her breath came in sharp bursts, each one frosting the air. Ranger leapt down beside them, nails clicking briefly before he found purchase. For a moment, the ravine swallowed sound, and the shouts faded. Jack felt the forest close around them, heavy and watchful. They crouched behind a fallen log slick with ice. Jack shrugged out of his jacket and draped it around Mia's shoulders, hands moving with practiced economy. Up close he saw the marks on her wrists, where tape had bitten deep, the purple bloom of a bruise along her ribs, the cut at her temple already stiff with dried blood. "Who did this?" he asked quietly. Mia swallowed, steadying herself. "Men who didn't want questions answered," she said. "They're not freelancers. Someone gave that order." She lifted her chin toward the slope they'd fled. "And he won't let this go." Jack nodded once. He didn't ask for more yet. He knew how trauma narrowed words, how the wrong question could shatter focus. Ranger pressed close to Mia's knee, warmth seeping through her pants, his amber eyes tracking the trees. She managed a thin, startled smile and touched his neck briefly, fingers trembling. "Good timing," she murmured. Ranger leaned into the touch, then stilled again, all business. A crack sounded above them, a branch snapped under weight. Jack shifted, bringing his rifle up just enough to be ready without exposing himself. The calm voice spoke again, closer now. "Careful," it said. "She's with someone." A pause. "Find the dog." Jack exhaled slowly through his nose. He reached into his pack and pulled free a strip of jerky, broke it in half, and tossed one piece down the ravine. Ranger's ears flicked. Jack gave a small hand signal. Ranger vanished into the trees, moving low and fast, taking the sound with him. Almost immediately, a shout went up farther east. The men followed the noise. Jack waited 5 heartbeats, then moved west with Mia, using the ravine to mask their tracks before climbing back into the timber. They ran until Mia's legs buckled. Jack caught her before she fell, eased her down against a boulder rimed with ice. She closed her eyes for a second, teeth clenched, then opened them again, stubborn as a nail. "They buried me," she said, the words landing flat and heavy. "Not to kill me fast, to make me disappear." Jack studied her face. There was fear there, yes, but layered under it was anger sharpened into resolve. He recognized it. It was the look of someone who had already decided survival wasn't enough. "Why you?" he asked. "Because I wouldn't look away. Mia replied. She drew a careful breath. I was working a smuggling case tied to this forest routes, drop sites. Then I found money moving through accounts that didn't match the story. When I asked questions, people stopped returning calls. When I pushed harder, my car broke down on a service road that shouldn't have been blocked. After that, she gestured weakly at the snow. Orders came down. The calm voice cut through the trees again, farther off now, edged with irritation. She's injured. Box them in. Jack made a decision. He lifted Mia, this time shifting her so she could lean more of her weight into him, and turned north toward higher ground. He knew these slopes, knew where old logging cuts left narrow passes and where the wind scoured snow down to ice. He moved with the certainty of a man following memory rather than maps. Ranger reappeared 15 minutes later, flanks dusted white, eyes bright. He fell back into position without breaking stride. Jack felt the tension in his chest ease by a fraction. They crested a ridge where the trees thinned and a gray shape rose ahead, an old fire lookout cabin, half buried in snow, roof sagging, but walls intact. Jack angled toward it. Inside, the cabin smelled of old wood and cold iron. Jack set Mia down against the wall and barred the door with a length of timber. He knelt and checked her injuries with quick, competent hands, wrapping her wrists with cloth torn from his spare shirt, binding her ribs as best he could. Mia watched him work, eyes sharp despite exhaustion. "You're not local law," she said. "No," Jack replied. "You move like military." He met her gaze briefly. "Used to." Outside, boots crunched closer. Shadows passed the frosted window. The calm voice spoke again, almost conversational. "This ends now," it said. "Bring her out and you walk away." Jack didn't answer. Ranger's hackles rose, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Mia straightened, pain flashing across her face, and shook her head once. "If I go," she said softly, "they finish it." Jack chambered around, the sound crisp in the small space. "Then you don't go," he said. The door rattled as a fist struck it. Snow sifted from the beams. Outside, the calm voice hardened. "Last chance." Jack shifted his stance. Positioning himself between the door and Mia, Ranger pressed to his leg like a coiled spring. He felt the old clarity settle over him, the one he had tried to leave behind. The forest had gone quiet again, the kind of quiet that came just before things broke. The forest answered the gunshot with silence, a thick, stunned quiet that swallowed the echo as if it had never existed. Mia's body jolted at the sound, a sharp tremor that ran through her frame, but her eyes stayed clear, focused, cutting through the dark like blades. "They have radios," she whispered, breath fogging in short bursts. "And someone inside the department. This wasn't a mistake. They want me erased." Jack didn't respond with words. He shifted his grip, adjusted her weight so her injured side pressed less against him, and moved. Ranger swung wide without being told, cutting a fast arc through the trees, paws striking snow in deliberate, uneven beats designed to confuse anyone listening. The tactic worked immediately. A voice barked an order uphill. Another cursed. A flashlight beam skidded across trunks where Jack had been seconds earlier, then veered off after Ranger's noise. Jack felt a grim flicker of gratitude and humor twist together in his chest. Ranger's bark rose again, sharp and annoyed, the unmistakable sound of a dog scolding the universe for human stupidity. Jack huffed a breath that might have been a laugh if his lungs weren't burning, then pushed harder. They plunged into the lower timber where the snow lay deeper and the ground sloped toward a narrow basin choked with alder. Jack angled toward it because sound died there. Mia stumbled once, caught herself, jaw locked tight against pain. She was tall enough to keep stride when her legs obeyed, about average height, lean, built like someone who ran toward problems rather than away from them, and even now, bleeding and shaking, she moved with a stubborn efficiency that told Jack she'd trained her body to keep going when it wanted to stop. Her dark hair, matted with ice, whipped loose around her face, and the pale line of her mouth flattened with concentration. "Don't slow down," she said, more command than plea. Jack nodded, though he doubted she could see it. A burst of radio chatter crackled behind them. The calm voice from before cut through again, precise and unhurried. "Split, 2 east, 2 south. She can't outrun blood loss." Jack's jaw set. He didn't know the man's name yet, but he knew the type. Someone who stayed calm because consequences had never landed on him personally. Jack had met men like that in briefing rooms and court-martial hallways. He guided Mia into the alder basin and stopped just long enough to smear snow over their tracks, dragging a fallen branch behind him to erase the straight line. Ranger reappeared at Jack's right, chest heaving, eyes bright, then immediately disappeared again at a hand signal, this time angling uphill to pull pursuit away from the basin. They crouched behind a hummock, Jack's shoulder pressed into the frozen earth, Mia's breath rasping in his ear. He felt the tremor in her start to ease, replaced by a hard stillness. "I can hear them," she murmured. "They're close." Jack closed his eyes for half a second and listened. He heard boots crunching, uneven and rushed, and the soft, telltale squeal of a radio being keyed. He waited until the steps passed, then slid backward on his palms and motioned Mia to follow. They moved like shadows, slow and deliberate, letting distance do the work bullets would otherwise do. At the basin's edge stood an abandoned logging skid road, half buried and unused for years. Jack knew it from memory. He'd walked it once after the Army, looking for a place where nothing asked questions. Now it offered cover and a way out. He guided Mia along the road's edge, careful to step on rock where snow was thin, then cut off again toward a stand of old-growth firs whose branches formed a low, dark ceiling. They stopped there. Jack knelt, checked Mia's ribs with 2 fingers, counted her breaths. She watched him, eyes steady. "They buried me to make a point," she said quietly. "Not to punish me, to warn anyone else." "One." "About what?" Jack asked. "Money," she said. "Roots through Pine Hollow. A shell company buying land to hide drop sites. I traced a payment that shouldn't exist. When I asked for oversight, someone redirected me. When I didn't take the hint, they took me off the board." Her voice hardened. The order didn't come from the men with shovels. A new sound drifted in, the distant growl of an engine. Jack's head snapped up. He felt a chill crawl under his collar that had nothing to do with temperature. Engines meant coordination, means resources, means confidence. "We need cover," he said, already moving. He led her downslope to a shallow cut where a rusted culvert ran under the road. The metal mouth was rimed with ice, dark inside. Jack slid in first, then pulled Mia after him, careful of her ribs. Ranger materialized silently at the culvert's edge and slipped inside last, shaking snow from his coat once before settling, all watchful stillness. The vehicle rolled closer and stopped. Doors opened. Boots crunched. A man spoke near the culvert, voice unfamiliar young, tight, trying to sound older than he was. "Tracks end here." Jack pictured him easily. Early 20s, narrow shoulders under borrowed authority, skin pale from winter and nerves, eyes darting because he knew he didn't belong in decisions like this. Another voice answered, older, rougher. "She went underground." A pause. Then the calm voice again, closer now, edged with irritation. "Fan out. Check every cut." The culvert filled with breath and tension. Mia's hand found Jack's sleeve, fingers cold and steady. Ranger's ears flicked forward, a low vibration building in his chest. Jack laid 2 fingers along Ranger's collar, a silent reminder. Not yet. The boots passed within arm's reach. Jack smelled oil and cold metal. A flashlight beam slid across the culvert mouth and moved on. The engine started again and rolled away, slower this time, searching. They waited until the sound faded completely. Jack eased out first, scanned, then helped Mia up. Her knees shook when she stood, but she didn't complain. "There's a place," she said after a moment. "An old ranger station, north of here. My partner used it for winter patrols before he transferred." She stopped, breath hitching once at the word partner. Jack caught the flicker of grief and anger that crossed her face and understood without asking that the transfer hadn't been voluntary. If they're using radios, they'll assume I'd head there, which means they might miss the trail if we go past it. Jack weighed the choice. He trusted terrain more than assumptions, but he trusted Mia's instincts about people. "We'll pass it," he said. Then cut west. They moved again. The forest grew thicker, darker. Snow muffled everything until even Jack's breathing felt too loud. Ranger ranged ahead, circling back every few minutes to check in, once pausing long enough to look at Jack with an expression that said, plainly, this was why dogs preferred simple lives. Jack gave him a brief grin and a tap on the shoulder. "Keep working." A single shot cracked the quiet warning fire, high and wide. Jack felt it in his bones. He shoved Mia forward, ducked, then veered sharply left, dragging a deadfall branch behind him to scatter snow and confuse the line. Ranger barked once, furious, then tore off in the opposite direction, crashing through brush with theatrical enthusiasm. Jack heard curses and hurried steps follow the noise. He used the moment to pull Mia into a hollow beneath a root ball, packed snow falling over them like a curtain. They waited, hearts hammering, until the shouts faded. When they moved again, dawn had begun to bruise the sky, a thin gray seam opening above the trees. Jack led them to a rocky outcrop that overlooked a narrow valley. He stopped there, not because they were safe, but because Mia couldn't go much farther without rest. He wrapped her tighter, checked the binding at her ribs, and met her gaze. "We'll get you out," he said. It wasn't a promise of victory, it was a promise of effort. Below them, a flashlight flickered once and vanished. The forest settled back into its breathless hush. Jack crouched, Ranger pressed to his leg, and waited for the next move, knowing the quiet would not last. Jack led Mia through the last stand of firs as the slope eased and the trees opened into a narrow clearing cupped by rock. His cabin waited there, low and dark, its roof sagging under a skin of snow, smoke leaking thin and steady from a stovepipe that had learned the patience of winters. It was a place Jack had built with his hands and his silence. Boards cut straight, joints tight, nothing ornamental, nothing that invited questions. He paused long enough to scan the tree line, then ushered Mia inside and barred the door with a length of ironwood worn smooth by years of use. The fire answered him immediately, embers breathing up into flame like a watchful eye, and warmth began the slow work of pulling life back into skin and bone. Mia sank onto the bench by the hearth with a careful exhale, shoulders slumping as the heat reached her. Up close, the damage showed more clearly. The bruising along her ribs had spread into a dark bloom. Her wrists were raw and swollen beneath Jack's improvised bindings, and the cut at her temple had reopened, a thin line of blood tracing down to her cheek. She was 33 and looked every inch the detective she was. Compact, wiry, a body trained to endure long nights and worse answers. Her hair, dark brown and usually disciplined, fell loose in damp strands. Her skin, olive under the grime, warmed slowly toward color. But it was her eyes that held Jack's attention, hazel and unblinking, carrying a heat that pain had not managed to dim. Ranger circled the room once, nose skimming the floorboards, then planted himself near the door, back to the fire, head angled toward the window. His coat steamed faintly as snow melted into the grain of the wood. 4 years old, broad-chested, scars hidden beneath fur, he looked like a dog who had learned that comfort was a luxury you took only after the work was done. Jack knelt by the stove, fed it a split log, then turned to Mia with a mug of water and a square of jerky broken small enough to manage. "Slow," he said. "Your ribs." She nodded, obeyed, and when her hand steadied she spoke without preamble. "I was working a smuggling case tied to Pine Hollow. Timber routes used as cover, then narcotics, then weapons. The money didn't match the seizures. It never does, until you ask why." Her voice was low, even, the cadence of someone used to testifying under lights. "I followed a transfer that shouldn't exist, shell companies, land purchases in the forest. Then I saw the badge money. a pocket that kept refilling. She met his gaze. The order to bury me didn't come from the men with shovels. Jack leaned against the counter, arms crossed, feeling the old sour taste rise in his mouth. He knew that pocket. He'd watched it swallow a report once, turn a truth into a footnote, then erase the footnote too. Who? He asked. Someone with authority, Mia said. Someone who can move resources without paperwork slowing him down. Radios, vehicles, men who don't ask questions. I don't have a name I can prove yet. She reached into the inner pocket of her jacket and stopped, breath hitching. The proof isn't on me. Jack's eyes narrowed. I encrypted it, she continued. A USB. I hid it where I could get it later. Somewhere they watch, because they know I wouldn't destroy it. Her jaw tightened. I didn't plan on being buried before I could retrieve it. Jack snorted softly, not in humor, but recognition. Plans have a way of getting revised. He moved closer, checked the bindings at her ribs, retied them cleaner. His hands were steady, competent. Where? Mia hesitated just long enough to be honest. An old ranger substation north of here. Decommissioned but not forgotten. Cameras still pull power from a generator someone keeps serviced. She swallowed. They'll be expecting me to go back for it. The cabin creaked as wind pressed snow against the walls. Jack crossed to the window and wiped a small circle clear, scanning the clearing. Nothing moved but drifting flakes. He felt the quiet settle, heavy and listening. Good, he said. Expectation makes people sloppy. Mia watched him with a look that held both gratitude and appraisal. You talk like this isn't the first time someone tried to erase you. Jack's mouth twitched. It isn't. He didn't elaborate. He poured antiseptic, cleaned the cut at her temple, taped it clean. Ranger shifted, glanced back, then returned to his watch. The dog's presence filled the room in a way Jack had never been able to explain, like an anchor you didn't feel until the current pulled. A sound carried through the clearing, the faint crunch of boots, distant, then the low idle of an engine. Jack stiffened. He reached for his rifle from its hooks by the door and slid it free without a sound. Mia straightened despite the pain, eyes sharp again. They're close, she said. Jack nodded. They will be. He lowered his voice. You rest. I'll keep them guessing. He moved to the back wall and lifted a rug, revealing a square hatch set flush with the floorboards. The tunnel beneath it breathed cold air, smelling of soil and pine roots. Jack had dug it years ago after a blizzard pinned him for 3 days and taught him what complacency cost. He opened it just enough to confirm it was clear, then closed it again. If they breach, he said, we don't fight them here. The engine cut. Voices murmured beyond the trees. One laughed, a short, careless sound. Another answered, sharper. Jack recognized the cadence even before the man spoke clearly. The calm voice. He's close, it said, conversational. Find the dog. Ranger's ears pricked. A low growl rolled through his chest, not loud, not wild measured. Jack laid a hand along the dog's neck, felt the vibration ease. Easy, he murmured. Ranger pressed into his palm, eyes never leaving the door. Mia pushed herself upright. If they get the USB, she said, they clean the trail. It won't stop with me. Jack met her gaze. They won't get it. A knock struck the door firm, controlled. Not a kick. Not yet. Open up, the calm voice called. We know you're in there. Jack didn't answer. He shifted his stance to put himself between the door and Mia, rifle angled down, but ready. Ranger rose, weight forward, teeth bared just enough to promise consequences. The knock came again. Harder. Snow sifted from the lintel. Last chance, the voice said, irritation creeping in. You walk away. She comes with us. Mia shook her head once, fierce. Jack felt the decision settle like a stone in his gut heavy sure. He remembered a room with fluorescent lights and a man who wouldn't meet his eyes while a report was read aloud. He remembered how silence had been framed as duty. He would not do that again. He chambered around. The sound was small but absolute. No, he said. The door shuddered as a weight hit it. Wood groaned. Ranger lunged forward, barking sharp and furious, then leapt back at Jack's signal. Jack moved, flipped the hatch, pulled Mia toward it. The door cracked, a boot punching through. Jack fired once into the jamb, not to hit, but to speak. The shot boomed in the cabin, splinters flying. Outside, curses erupted, feet scrambled back. Jack pushed Mia into the tunnel, followed, then dropped the hatch and dragged the rug back into place. Darkness closed in, broken only by their breath and the distant thud of fists against wood. The tunnel swallowed sound as it had been designed to do. Jack crawled first, Ranger next, Mia following with controlled determination. Above them, the cabin took the beating meant to slow pursuit. They emerged 50 yards downslope where the tunnel opened behind a tangle of brush. Jack eased them out one by one, scanned, then pulled the door shut behind them and buried it with snow. The clearing glowed faintly from the fire's reflection through the window. Jack felt a pang, not for the cabin, but for the lie that quiet places could stay untouched. They moved into the trees, keeping low. Mia breathed hard but steady. "They won't stop," she said. Jack didn't slow. "Good," he replied. "Neither will we." Night fell hard over Pine Hollow, a lid snapping shut on the world. Engines crawled through the snow beyond the trees, low and patient, and headlights swept the forest like blades searching for a throat. Jack moved without speaking. He slid the rug aside and lifted the floor hatch, guiding Mia down the narrow ladder into the storm cellar he had carved years earlier with blistered hands and a stubborn refusal to trust the weather. The space smelled of packed earth and old pine, dry despite the cold, reinforced with salvaged beams and iron brackets that bore the marks of careful planning rather than panic. Mia lowered herself onto the bench, teeth clenched against pain, her breath steadying as Jack set the ladder flush and sealed the hatch. He left her with a canteen, a folded blanket, and the quiet certainty of his presence above. Ranger took position at the cabin door, body square, tail low, ears angled toward the clearing. At 4 years old, he carried the compact power of a working dog kept honest by discipline, sable coat bristling where snowmelt darkened the fur along his spine. His amber eyes reflected firelight and the moving white beyond the window, calculating, patient. Jack rested a hand briefly between Ranger's shoulders pressure, not comfort, then rose and killed the lamp. The cabin dropped into shadow, the stove's glow muffled behind its iron belly. The first vehicle rolled into the clearing and stopped. A second followed. Doors opened. Boots crunched. Jack heard voices drift in, their tones relaxed enough to be dangerous. Someone laughed, short and ugly. "Cold night for a walk," a man said, and Jack pictured him easily. Broad through the chest, thick neck disappearing into a collar pulled too tight, beard untrimmed, the laugh of someone who enjoyed other people's discomfort because it distracted him from his own smallness. Another voice answered, younger, breathy with nerves, trying to sound like he belonged. "Place looks empty." A third voice cut through them both, smooth and level, carrying authority without effort. "Clear it." The calm voice again. Jack felt the familiar prickle at the base of his skull. They hit the door with a shoulder, and it gave enough to complain. Wood groaned. Ranger did not bark. He stood like a statue with a pulse, muscles locked, waiting for the moment Jack would need him loud. The men spilled in, flashlights bouncing across walls and rafters, the beam lingering on the rifle rack, the stove, the table scarred by old work. A boot kicked the bench. Another man rifled through drawers. "He was here," the bearded one said, pleased. "Fire's warm." Jack moved through the cabin's blind spots, stepping where boards didn't creak, breath measured. He knew every sound this place made because he had listened to it through storms that wanted to tear it apart. He heard the laugh again, closer to the hatch, and his jaw tightened. The man crouched and slapped the rug aside. "Look at this," he said, grinning. "Trap door." Below, Mia's fingers dug into the blanket. Her eyes burned in the dark, wet but unbroken. She did not cry. She remembered the weight of soil on her chest, the way breath had become a bargain. She remembered deciding she would not beg. When the sound of boots shifted overhead, her body tensed, but her mind stayed clear. Jack's hand found her shoulder through the hatch, seam one squeeze, firm and brief. A vow without words: no one gets to bury you again. Upstairs, the bearded man reached for the hatch handle. The calm voice spoke from behind him, a hand on his shoulder. "Leave it," it said. "He's not stupid enough to hide under his own floor." The hand was pale, long-fingered, nails clean, a man who cared about details. The bearded man scoffed. "Or maybe he is." Jack acted. He rolled a glass jar from the counter with a flick of his boot, sending it skittering across the floor to shatter near the back wall. Flashlight swung. "There!" someone shouted. Ranger exploded into motion, a thunderous bark tearing the cabin open as he lunged toward the sound. Men shouted, tripped, cursed. Jack slipped past the confusion and out the back, boots finding the packed path without looking. He circled wide, using the trees, and re-entered through the side window he had rigged for exactly this. Hinges loosened, latch shaved thin. Inside, chaos had loosened their focus. Jack moved like a rumor, not a target. He slammed a shoulder into the bearded man's ribs, drove him into the table, and took the flashlight with a twist that ended in a crack and a howl. Ranger pinned another man against the wall, teeth flashing, growl vibrating through timber. The calm voice barked an order short, precise, and the men rallied, weapons coming up. Jack fired once into the ceiling, a warning shot that made plaster rain and bought him a second. He didn't need more. "Out!" he snapped, and Ranger broke contact, darting to the door and vanishing into the snow. Jack retreated to the hatch, dropped through, sealed it, and dragged the rug back as fists hammered above. The cellar swallowed sound. He landed beside Mia, crouched, listening to the cabin absorb violence meant to flush them out. Minutes stretched. The pounding faded. Engines started. A voice drifted faintly through floorboards. The calm one again, edged with irritation. "He's gone. Burn it if you have to." Heat bloomed above as someone kicked the stove. Smoke seeped down, thin and acrid. Jack felt anger spike, then settle into focus. He led Mia to the far end of the cellar where a narrow crawl cut away into darkness, an old drainage run he had extended and shored with scrap. They moved on hands and knees, Ranger ghosting ahead until cold air brushed their faces. They emerged behind a fallen cedar where snow piled deep and sound died quickly. The cabin glowed faintly now, flame licking at a window frame, then higher. Jack did not look back. They moved through the night, skirting ridgelines, using wind and contour to break pursuit. Mia's breathing steadied into a rhythm she recognized from long runs. Inhale, count, exhale. Pain compartmentalized. At a narrow saddle they stopped, and Jack pressed her down as a pair of lights passed below, the engine's note rising and falling. Ranger watched them go, then turned back to Jack with a look that said the job was not done. By the time the forest thinned into a rocky cut, dawn teased the horizon with gray. Jack guided them into a shallow cave he used as a cache tucked under a granite lip. Inside he struck a match and lit a shielded candle. The light revealed a woman crouched near the back, rifle across her knees. She straightened, surprise flashing into relief. Her name was Sarah Caldwell. Late 40s, tall and spare, hair cut short and silvered at the temples, skin weathered by wind rather than age. Her eyes were sharp blue, the kind that missed nothing and forgave little. She wore layered wool and a faded parka patched at the elbows, moved with the economical confidence of someone who had lived outside long enough to stop pretending it was romantic. Years ago, a winter rescue had taken her brother when a cornice broke under his weight, and the mountains had never given him back. Since then, Sarah had stayed close to the land, helping when she could, asking few questions, trusting fewer people. "Your place is burning," she said, voice steady. Jack nodded. They came for her. Sarah's gaze shifted to Mia, taking in the bruises, the set of her jaw. "You look like trouble," she said, not unkindly. Mia managed a thin smile. "I keep finding it." Sarah passed a thermos. "Drink. We move soon." Outside, Engines prowled, but farther now, uncertain. The night had failed to finish its work. Jack crouched, Ranger pressed close, and watched the candle's flame hold steady. He knew the hunt would not end with the dark. It never did. They reached the abandoned ranger station just after dawn, when the sky still held the color of bruised steel and the forest seemed unsure whether to wake. The building squatted at the edge of a clearing choked with snow and dead grass, its windows clouded, its roof bowed under years of neglect. A faded emblem of crossed pines and an eagle peeled from the door, the paint flaking like old scabs. Jack paused long enough to listen, then waved them in. Inside, the air smelled of mouse droppings, damp paper, and iron. It was quiet in the way places became quiet when people stopped caring whether they survived. Mia lowered herself onto a metal desk, wincing as her ribs protested. The night had taken a toll. Her face looked sharper now, cheekbones standing out under pale olive skin, eyes shadowed but alert. She had washed some of the blood away with snow, leaving a faint rust-colored stain along her hairline. Even exhausted, she carried herself with the disciplined economy of a detective who had learned to conserve motion and words. Ranger padded in behind them, shook snow from his coat once, then pressed his head into Mia's lap without invitation, warm and insistent. She startled, then laughed softly, the sound thin but real. "This dog," she murmured, fingers sinking into the thick fur along his neck. "Is he my partner now or my supervisor?" "He's the boss," Jack said, checking the windows. "I just hold the leash." Ranger thumped his tail once, satisfied. Jack moved through the station, cataloging what remained: a cracked radio set without power, a map board still pinned with yellowed trail notes, a locker with one door hanging loose. He dragged a filing cabinet to brace the door and cracked a window just enough to vent smoke if they needed a fire. Outside, the forest breathed again, birds testing the morning. Inside, the quiet sharpened Mia's thoughts. "They weren't improvising," she said suddenly. "Last night, the way they split, the way they searched, that wasn't panic." She met Jack's eyes. "That was procedure." Jack nodded. "Someone trained them, or authorized them." She reached into her jacket again, stopped, then closed her hand. "The USBI told you about?" "It's worse than I said." Jack leaned against the wall, arms folded. He waited. "It doesn't just show routes and payoffs," Mia continued. "It has schedules, drop times that line up with patrol gaps, messages, orders." Her voice dropped. "From someone wearing the right hat." Jack felt the words settle. He'd seen hats do damage before, ranks and titles that made lies sound official. "Local?" "Yes." She drew a slow breath. "A commander. Not the chief, not the sheriff. Someone who moves quietly and signs off on special operations. Someone who can make radios appear and reports disappear." Jack's mouth tightened. He pictured the calm voice again, the measured tone that never rose. He imagined a man with careful grooming, beard trimmed to regulation, hair cut just short enough to look responsible, eyes that smiled only when cameras were on. "You sure?" Mia nodded. "I followed the money until it started following me. That's when my partner got transferred." A flicker crossed her face, anger, grief, resolve braided together. "He tried to warn me. Then he was gone." Ranger shifted, sensing the tension, and pressed closer, head heavy in her lap. Mia's fingers curled into his fur as if grounding herself. "You don't even know my name," she said quietly. "Mia Bennett," Jack replied without hesitation. She looked up, surprised, then nodded once. They rested only as long as they had to. By mid-morning, wind carried sound farther, and Jack didn't like that. He led them out the back and into a narrow draw that bent toward a stand of young aspens. Ranger ranged ahead, nose low. Jack stopped short when the dog froze, ears pricked. A second later, Jack saw it too, a cigarette butt crushed into the snow, still fresh, paper damp but unsoaked. Someone had been here recently. Watching. They didn't move for a full minute. Then a shape detached itself from the trees uphill, hands raised. "Easy," a woman's voice called. "I'm alone." She stepped into view slowly. Her name was Laura Pike. Early 30s, average height, bundled in a forest green parka too large for her frame, hood pulled back to reveal a spill of sandy blonde hair tucked behind one ear. Her skin was fair and weathered by cold, freckles dusting her nose. She moved carefully, eyes scanning Jack's hands, then Ranger, then Mia, calculating without fear. There was a stiffness to her posture that suggested she'd learned to brace for disappointment. "I work trails," Laura said. "Seasonal. I saw smoke last night, then trucks." She swallowed. "I didn't call it in." Jack studied her face. People who lied usually hurried. Laura didn't. "Why not?" "Because the last time I called something in," she said, jaw tightening, "my supervisor told me to stop asking questions and start updating my resume." Mia met her gaze. "You've seen them before." Laura nodded. "Men who don't belong, moving like they do, radios, no insignia." She glanced at Ranger. "And dogs don't lie. Yours says we're being watched." Ranger's tail was still, his attention fixed uphill. Jack followed his line of sight and caught a flicker of movement, a shadow that didn't match the wind. He felt the pressure build again. "We can't stay," he said. Laura hesitated, then made a decision. "There's a culvert west of here that feeds into an old maintenance road. Cameras don't cover it." She lifted her chin. "If you're running, that's your path." Jack weighed the risk, then nodded. "Lead." They moved fast. The culvert was narrow and cold, water frozen in ripples along the concrete. Halfway through, Ranger stopped and let out a low growl. Jack raised a fist. Voices drifted from the far end, two men, close. One laughed. "He won't go this way," a voice said. The calm one. "Too obvious." Jack felt the choice narrow to a point. He whispered to Ranger and sent him back the way they'd come, a single bark echoing sharp. The voices reacted instantly, boots pounding away from the culvert. Jack counted to 3, then pushed through with Mia and Laura, emerging onto the maintenance road as the sound pulled farther off. They reached a small rise overlooking the ranger station. From there, Jack saw a man step into the open, tall, neat, beard-trimmed, hat pulled low. He spoke into a radio, posture relaxed. Even at a distance, Jack felt the weight of him. The enemy in the open at last, still half hidden by authority. Mia followed Jack's gaze and went still. "That's him," she said. "The commander." Jack memorized the man's silhouette, the way he held himself as if the forest were another office. He felt something old align inside him, not rage, but clarity. "Then we stop running," he said. They backed away quietly, the plan forming without words. Ranger returned minutes later, tongue lolling, eyes bright, pleased with himself. Mia shook her head with a breathless laugh. Definitely the boss. Jack allowed himself a thin smile. The hunt had a face now. They decided to strike before the forest finished closing its fist. Waiting would only sharpen the enemy's reach. Acting would bend it. By mid-afternoon, the clouds thickened into a low iron ceiling, pressing cold light down onto the timberline. Jack led them along a game trail that cut north toward Blackstone Ridge, where an old mining company warehouse crouched against the slope like a forgotten scar. The building had been declared unsafe years ago, officially abandoned after a structural incident, yet power still hummed there at night. Cameras still blinked, and vehicles still came and went, with a discipline that belonged to active operations, not ruins. From a rocky overlook, they studied the place. The warehouse was long and low, corrugated steel dulled to gray, roof bowed under snow. A single smokestack coughed thin exhaust, proof of a generator running somewhere inside. 2 lights burned over the main entrance. A third swept intermittently from a mounted camera that followed a lazy arc, pausing just long enough to remind anyone watching that it saw more than it revealed. Jack counted steps, angles, blind spots. Ranger lay flat beside him, chin on paws, eyes tracking movement with the quiet intensity of a predator that knew patience paid better than speed. Mia crouched behind a rock, breathing measured, pain held in check by purpose. She looked different now than she had the night before, still bruised, still hurt, but sharpened. Her hair was pulled back again, discipline reasserted, jaw set. She had the look Jack recognized from operations briefings long past. Someone who knew the cost and had decided to pay it anyway. "Back door," she whispered. "Blind spot. I tagged it months ago." Laura Pike stayed farther back, rifle slung but unused. She was pale in the cold light, freckles stark against fair skin, eyes darting between Jack and the building. "I'll watch the road," she said. "If anything moves that shouldn't, you'll know." There was resolve in her voice now, the stiffness replaced by something steadier. Sometimes courage arrived only after you'd decided not to be quiet anymore. Jack nodded once. He moved downslope alone, boots finding rock where snow thinned, until he reached the rear service door. He took a breath, then kicked a loose sheet of metal propped against the wall. It clattered down the slope with a shriek that cut the air. Inside, a shout answered. A guard stepped out. Young, narrow-shouldered, face pinched by cold and nerves, beanie pulled too low over dark hair. He carried his rifle wrong, too tight to his chest. Ranger exploded from shadow. He hit the guard low, driving the man into the snow with controlled violence, forearms pinned, teeth bared inches from a trembling throat. The guard dropped his weapon immediately, breath coming fast, eyes wide with the shock of realizing he had misjudged how quickly a quiet place could turn loud. Ranger held him there, weight perfect, no killing bite, just consequence. Jack slipped inside. The warehouse smelled of oil and damp metal. Pipes rattled overhead. The camera feeds lined one wall in a flicker of black and white squares, each labeled in careful handwriting. Mia moved past Jack without hesitation and took the control room. Her fingers flew across the terminal, muscle memory guiding her through passwords and partitions she had studied for months. A drive slot clicked open. She slid in her encrypted USB and began the transfer, eyes scanning lines of code as if they were streets she knew by heart. Data poured in, shipment logs, patrol schedules, timestamps that lined up too neatly with random gaps. She split the stream, routing copies to a federal contact she trusted and to an investigative reporter who had burned sources and friendships alike to publish truths that scared comfortable people. The upload bar crept forward. Behind them, a door creaked. Jack turned just as a man stepped into the control room, filling the doorway with practiced ease. Derek Vaughn was 42 and wore his years like armor broad shoulders under a tailored jacket, beard trimmed close to a jaw that had learned how to smile for cameras and harden for rooms without them. His eyes were gray and cold, assessing without hurry, the eyes of a man accustomed to deciding who mattered. A thin scar traced his knuckle, old and white, a souvenir from a night when force had been easier than words. "Well," Vaughn said lightly, as if greeting colleagues, "you should have stayed buried." He raised his gun. Jack closed the distance before the trigger finished its thought, shoulders slamming into Vaughn's chest. The shot went wild, punching a pipe. Water burst overhead, freezing as it hit the floor, turning concrete slick. Ranger lunged in, clamping down on Vaughn's wrist, wrenching the weapon free with a snarl that vibrated bone. Vaughn staggered, boots sliding, curses sharp and ugly. Jack drove him down and wrenched his arms behind his back, steel cuffs snapping closed with a sound that ended arguments. Mia yanked the drive free, the upload complete. Alarms screamed. Red lights pulsed. Somewhere outside, engines revved. Laura's voice crackled through Jack's radio, tight but steady. "Company inbound. Now." They moved. Ranger released Vaughn and took position at the door, teeth flashing, daring anyone to test him. Jack hauled Vaughn to his feet and shoved him forward. The man tried to speak, then stopped, calculating again, already measuring angles for a future that had narrowed dangerously. They slipped out through a side exit as boots thundered toward the control room, the forest swallowing them just as sirens cut the air. They didn't stop running until the ridge broke their line of sight. Jack forced Vaughn to his knees, breath steaming. Mia stood over him, USB clenched in her hand, eyes steady. Vaughn met her gaze and smiled thinly. "You won't finish this," he said. Mia didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth was already moving faster than he could. The data was already gone when the phone rang. The sound cut through the forest clearing like a blade striking glass sharp, out of place, impossible to ignore. Derek Vaughn stood cuffed on his knees, breath fogging the air, shoulders still squared with the stubborn pride of a man who had never believed the rules applied to him. The phone vibrated again in his pocket. Jack watched Vaughn's eyes flick downward for half a second too long. That was all it took. Jack reached in, pulled the device free, and turned the screen toward the thin light of dawn. Chief Logan Pierce. The name settled over them with the weight of a verdict. The forest seemed to lean in, branches creaking softly, as if it too wanted to hear what came next. Mia's breath caught, not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle hitch that betrayed how long she had carried this possibility without daring to say it out loud. She was standing straighter now despite the bruises, her shoulders squared under a borrowed jacket, hair pulled back tight again, the detective reclaiming herself piece by piece, her hazel eyes fixed on the glowing screen. "That's him," she said quietly. "That's the order." Jack didn't answer immediately. He studied the name as if it were another terrain feature to be mapped and crossed. Logan Pierce was a man the town trusted, a career lawman whose face appeared at charity breakfasts and ribbon cuttings, whose handshake was firm and practiced, whose smile showed just enough teeth to reassure donors without alarming them. Mid-50s, broad through the chest, hair iron gray and cut short, beard trimmed with regulation precision. Pierce had built a reputation on calm leadership and public safety, especially after a wildfire years back when he'd coordinated evacuations that saved dozens of homes. That single event had polished his image into something untouchable. Jack knew the type. One heroic chapter could erase a lot of footnotes. Mia looked from the phone to Jack. "He gave the green light," she said. "Everything else flowed from that." Jack glanced at Ranger, who stood close at his knee, tongue lolling briefly before the dog settled, ears forward. "Boss," Jack murmured, the corner of his mouth tightening. "We finish this?" Ranger barked once, sharp and satisfied, the sound echoing off the ridge like an answer already decided. Sirens cut through the morning not long after first distant, then layered, then unmistakably federal. Black SUVs rolled up the service road with a purpose that did not belong to local politics. Men and women stepped out wearing jackets that carried no town insignia, faces set in expressions that did not soften for familiarity. At their center was Deputy U.S. Marshal Karen Whitfield, early 40s, tall and athletic, dark skin weathered by years in the field, hair braided tight against her scalp. Her eyes were steady and assessing, the kind that weighed situations without flinching. She took in Vaughn, the cuffs, the phone in Jack's hand, and Mia's bruises in a single sweep. "We got the files," Whitfield said, voice level. "They're solid." Mia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She handed over the USB, fingers reluctant but resolute. "There's more," she said. "Schedules, messages. Pierce's fingerprints are all over it." Whitfield nodded. "We'll make sure a jury sees them." She turned her gaze to Vaughn. "You're done." Vaughn's jaw tightened. He tried to speak, then thought better of it as two marshals hauled him to his feet. His eyes flicked once toward the trees, toward the town beyond them, calculating even now. It didn't matter. The current had shifted. By the time the sun broke free of the clouds, Pine Hollow was no longer a quiet place. News vans lined the access road. Helicopter blades beat the air. Word moved faster than snowmelt. Chief Logan Pierce was taken into custody before noon, escorted out of his office with a face composed enough to fool cameras but not his hands, which shook just enough to betray the lie beneath the suit. His arrest cracked something open in the town. Names followed. Then more names. A lieutenant who had signed off on altered patrol routes, a contractor who had laundered money through land purchases. The pocket Mia had traced finally emptied itself into the open. Mia stood on the courthouse steps later that day, wrapped in a blanket offered by someone whose name she didn't catch. Reporters shouted questions. She answered only one. "Why didn't you give up?" a voice called. She looked past the cameras to where Jack stood at the edge of the crowd, brown jacket dusted with snow, Ranger sitting at his side like a patient sentinel. "Because the truth doesn't stay buried unless we help bury it," she said. Then she stepped back inside. Done. The weeks that followed softened the edges of winter. Snow retreated from the lower trails, revealing old footprints and newer ones layered together. Mia was officially cleared, her record restored, her badge returned with an apology that did not ask for forgiveness. She accepted a promotion she hadn't chased, the weight of it carried lightly but seriously. She slept through the night again, most nights, though sometimes she woke with the memory of Earth pressing in. On those mornings, she walked until her breath steadied. Jack returned to the forest. Offers came. Consulting work, commendations, quiet praise that felt too much like invitations back into rooms he had learned to leave. He declined them all. He fixed fences where the fire had licked too close. He rebuilt the cabin with salvaged wood and patience, the rhythm of honest work grounding him better than any metal ever had. Ranger stayed glued to his side, a little spoiled now, accepting jerky bribes from Mia when she visited, tail wagging with the confidence of a dog who knew his worth. Sarah Caldwell stopped by once with supplies, nodded approval at the rebuilt roof, and left without ceremony. Laura Pike kept her job and her voice, reporting what she saw without apology. Pine Hollow adjusted. Towns always did. On a late morning when the air smelled of thaw and pine sap, Mia joined Jack and Ranger on the ridge where the snow had first been disturbed. The ground there was bare now, dark earth exposed to light. Mia crouched and brushed her fingers across it, thoughtful. "Funny," she said. "This place feels quieter." Jack looked out over the trees, the mountains breathing under a widening sky. "Footprints fade," he said. "Doesn't mean they weren't there." Ranger sat between them, ears perked, listening to things neither of them could hear. In Pine Hollow, the story spread the way true stories often did. Not loudly, not cleanly, but persistently. People said the forest had watched over its own. Some joked about a guardian spirit. Others spoke of luck. Jack didn't bother correcting them. He knew better. Sometimes miracles arrived without thunder. Sometimes they came as a man who refused to look away, a woman who would not stay buried, and a dog who listened for a heartbeat beneath frozen ground. The dawn kept coming, and this time the truth stayed above it. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or light splitting the sky. They arrive quietly, through a man who refuses to walk away, a woman who refuses to stay buried, or a loyal dog who listens when the world goes silent. Many will say this was luck. Others will call it instinct. But those who have walked through real darkness know the truth. There are moments when God moves softly, guiding steps without announcing His presence. A pause in the forest, a heartbeat heard beneath frozen ground, a choice to act when it would have been easier to turn away. In our own lives, we all face winters like this, times when hope feels buried, when truth feels too heavy to carry, when doing the right thing costs more than we think we can afford. And yet, again and again, God sends help, sometimes in the form of a stranger, sometimes a friend, sometimes a quiet strength we didn't know we still had. If this story reminded you that you are not alone, if it stirred something in your heart, please share this video with someone who might need that reminder today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read every one. Subscribe to the channel to walk with us through more stories of courage, faith, and quiet miracles. May God watch over you and your loved ones. May He protect your steps, strengthen your spirit, and guide you through every winter toward the dawn waiting ahead.